This is a map of Japan. Over here, this chain of islands is called the Ryukyu Islands. Let's zoom in a bit. This island over here is the primary island of the Ryukyu chain, known as Okinawa, and it is in southern Okinawa that there was a cave which contains the bones of people who lived in the cave around 32,000 years ago. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give you all a general, brief history of Okinawa. I'd like to do so for various reasons. For one, I myself am part Okinawan. For two, I will be moving to Okinawa this year. I will be able to record Primus Academy videos on the spot of historical locations I want to talk about. So, I currently plan on making several Okinawan history-focused Primus Academy videos in the future. For three, the unique history of Okinawa isn't really that well known, and I'd like to take the chance to tell this story. After all, if I'm going to make more specified Okinawan history videos, you should probably at least know the general outline of Okinawan history first. So, how did these people arrive on Okinawa? Well, there are many theories. One theory proposed is that there was once a land bridge that connected mainland China to the Ryukyu Islands, from which people crossed over. As time went on, more Austronesians, Micronesians, and Japanese people began to immigrate to the island. It was a mixture of these ethnicities that led to the cultivation of the Ryukyuan ethnicity. Take this with a grain of salt, but as someone who is of Okinawan heritage myself, I have taken a few DNA tests that largely point to my Okinawan grandmother being approximately 88% Yamato, that is, people from mainland Japan, with the remaining percentage being from the various ethnicities that could be Austronesian and Micronesian. There is a very small portion of Shi Chinese ethnicity in my family, but I'm not so sure that's from the hypothetical land bridge suggested here. Ultimately, we don't have a flawless idea as to where the Ryukyuan ethnicity came from, but we do start looking at Okinawa history in what is called the Midden period, or the Shell Heap Age, which roughly corresponds to 14,000 BCE to 300 CE. Like other parts of the world, Okinawan society was a hunter-gatherer society. As time went on, however, the Okinawans began to discover the skill of fishing, as we can see prehistoric Okinawan centers of living moving from the interior of Okinawa into the coasts. In addition to fishing, the Okinawan civilization of 2,500 years ago had developed shell axes and other shell-based tools, corroborating this move to the coast and also giving Okinawa more things in common with various southeastern Pacific island cultures. Towards the end of the Midden period, Okinawa was showing more and more growing ties with neighboring Japan, as a style of pottery that was popular in Japan was also becoming popular in Okinawa. Okinawan shell rings were being imported to Japan. While Japan was one of the last of the East Asian nations to begin rice cultivation, Okinawa began rice cultivation even later, only beginning rice agriculture towards the end of the Midden period. The next major portion of Okinawan history that we know about comes from mythology, mostly from the Chuzan Seikan, a text compiled in 1650 when Japanese influence had already spread to Okinawa. The Chuzan Seikan provides us with a creation myth of Okinawa that results in the first king of Okinawa being the mythical Tenson, and the foundation of the Okinawan religion similar to Shinto. The mythology provided by the Chuzan Seikan continues to tell us of a man named Ryu, who overthrew the dynasty of Tenson's descendants many years later, with Ryu starting a new mythological dynasty over Okinawa. The text continues on to pick up at the end of the Hogen Rebellion, a conflict that had taken place in Japan which concluded in 1156 CE. The Japanese samurai Minamoto no Tametomo was defeated in the Hogen Rebellion and fled Japan, ultimately arriving on Okinawa. Upon reaching Okinawa, Minamoto had a son with a local Okinawan noblewoman. This son was named Shunten. It is with Shunten that we begin to transition out of the world of mythology and into the world of history, though where exactly mythology ends and history begins is unclear. Nevertheless, it is said that Shunten launched an uprising against King Ryu with the support of the people. With Ryu defeated, Shunten became the king of Okinawa and began to rule from Urasoe Castle. The government of Okinawa being based at Urasoe Castle began the Gusuku period, named after the term for the Okinawan castles/fortresses. It is also somewhere around this time that Okinawan society begins to leave the shores in favor of higher altitudes, as rice cultivation and agriculture have finally begun on Okinawa. Shunten's dynasty ended when his grandson, King Gihon, abdicated the throne and went into exile. He was succeeded by King Eiso, who established a new dynasty. This Eiso dynasty would continue for 5 generations. Under Eiso's dynasty, Gusuku Okinawa begins to grow in international prominence as Okinawa begins a profitable porcelain trade with the other countries of East Asia, causing Okinawa to become an important point for East Asian trade. The Okinawan language also receives the Japanese writing system called hiragana, and uses this to serve as the script for the Okinawan language. Like many other parts of the world, the Okinawan kingdom was threatened by the vast Mongol Empire. In 1272, Kublai Khan of the Mongol Empire dispatched envoys to Okinawa. The Mongols demanded Okinawa to submit to the empire. King Eiso refused. In 1276, the Mongol envoys returned to Okinawa, but the Okinawans drove them off the island. This incident, together with the failure of the Mongols to successfully invade Japan, led to the Mongol Empire giving up its aspirations to invade Okinawa. The tiny island nation had opposed the largest land empire the world has ever seen, and lived to tell about it. And then the Okinawan kingdom fell apart. For reasons that we don't really understand, the Okinawan kingdom fragmented in 1322, beginning the Three Kingdom period, or the Sanzan Jidai, meaning the Three Mountains period. Okinawa was divided by 3 kingdoms, the Hokkuzan Kingdom, the Chuzan Kingdom, and the Nanzan Kingdom. The Three Kingdoms period is a bit confusing, not because it's uniquely complex or anything, but because there are very few sources for such an important period of time, and pretty much all of these sources contradict each other. We do know 2 important things, however. First, in 1392, it is reported that some kingdom in Okinawa requested officials from the powerful neighboring empire of Ming China. To answer this request, China sent the 36 Ming families from Fujian. These Chinese officials were initially put to work in dealing with the ocean and trade affairs of the kingdom. Remember when I said that my family had a small portion of She Chinese? Well, the She ethnicity originated from Fujian, which tells me that it is more than likely that our Chinese ancestry came from these 36 Ming families. The second thing we know about the Three Kingdoms period is how it ended. A man named Shohashi began a quest to reunify Okinawa. He first conquered Chuzan, the Middle Kingdom, in 1404. In 1416, Sho conquered Hokkuzan, the Northern Kingdom. Finally, in 1429, Sho conquered Nanzan, the Southern Kingdom, uniting Okinawa. The nearby empire of Ming China had become a significant power in East Asia at this time, and was constantly seeking more countries to turn into tributary states. In 1429, the Emperor of China proclaimed Shohashi to be the ruler of the newly established Ryukyu Kingdom, presenting him with the Chuzan tablet. However, the Emperor also forced Sho and all future rulers of the kingdom to pay tribute to China. Though the Ryukyu Kingdom was nominally independent, it was clear that the Ryukyu Kingdom was subservient to China. So began the Ryukyu Kingdom period. Frankly, most of you might only know about the Ryukyu Kingdom from Europa Universalis games, where players often try to take over the world as the Ryukyu Kingdom for a challenge. Believe it or not, history does not happen like this. The capital of the Ryukyu Kingdom was at Shuri Castle. As the Ryukyu Kingdom was effectively a vassal of China, the 36 Ming families that were sent to manage trade began to take a more important role in the affairs of the Ryukyu government. These ethnic Chinese became prominent government advisors to the king and intermarried with the royal family. While the Chinese assisted the Ryukyuans in advancing their technology and diplomatic relations, the Ryukyuan government became more and more Chinese rather than Okinawan. The first Sho dynasty eventually ended as Shohashi's descendants did not have an heir. However, a new pretender took up the name of Sho and started the second Sho dynasty. It was under Shoshin, the third king from the second Sho dynasty, that the Ryukyu kingdom would make much of its developments. Shoshin saw an Okinawa that had peace and prosperity as it expanded and subjugated the other islands of the Ryukyu Islands. Much of the kingdom's administration and economy developed from the groundwork put into place by King Shoshin. The reign of Shoshin was known as the Great Days of Chuzan. Though the Ryukyu kingdom was a vassal to China, the Ryukyu kingdom had a largely close and friendly relationship with Japan. After all, the Okinawan people were biologically very close to the Japanese people. The Okinawan language was a Japonic language like Japanese. Much of Okinawan culture was similar, if not identical, to Japanese culture. Because of this, Japan felt a sort of brotherhood with the Ryukyu kingdom. However, this friendship was a double-edged sword. When Japan and Ming China were at war in Korea, the Japanese domain of Satsuma, ruled by the Shimazu clan, asked the Ryukyu kingdom to provide support to aid the Japanese in Korea. However, the Ryukyu kingdom was, again, effectively a puppet of China, and had a government of Chinese and Chinese-affiliated officials. To Satsuma's surprise, the Ryukyu kingdom refused their request, and the Japanese lost the war, pushed out of Korea. In retaliation for the Ryukyu kingdom refusing to aid Japan, the Satsuma domain dispatched 3,000 soldiers and over 100 ships to Okinawa in 1609. The Ryukyu kingdom was defeated at Amami Island before Satsuma forces began to land on Okinawa proper, defeating the Ryukyuans at Nakajin Castle. A second Satsuma landing took place near Yomitanzan, and their forces captured the old capital of Urasoe Castle. The Satsuma ships tried and failed to take Naha due to the strength of Ryukyuan defenses. Regardless, Satsuma forces managed to capture the capital of Shiri Castle and seized King Shōnei. The Okinawans were willing to fight and resist the Satsuma forces until their dying breath, but King Shōnei told his forces that life was a treasure, or in Okinawan, Nuchiru Takara. He ordered the Okinawans to cease fighting. The Ryukyu kingdom had lost. As a result of the brief war, the Ryukyu kingdom lost the Amami Islands to Satsuma. Many other priceless treasures of cultural importance were looted and brought back to Satsuma by Japanese samurai. The Ryukyu kingdom existed in an interesting political state. Satsuma had intended to annex the Ryukyu kingdom but did not wish to spark war with the much larger Ming China. After all, the Ryukyu kingdom was China's vassal. Instead of formally annexing the kingdoms, Satsuma imposed an interesting sort of situation in which the Satsuma domain effectively controlled Okinawa but kept it on the down low so that China wouldn't realize it. Yes, the Ryukyu kingdom was nominally independent, but to help you understand the power Satsuma had over the Ryukyu kingdom, the Satsuma banned sword ownership by commoners on Okinawa. This would eventually lead to the Okinawans inventing their own martial arts, using their bare hands and farming equipment. The most famous of the Okinawan martial arts that came from this time is known as karate. The Satsuma also kept the Ryukyu kingdom independent to take advantage of a loophole in Chinese economic policy. Ming China of this time refused to make a formal trade agreement with a country unless that country was a tributary state. By keeping the kingdom independent, Satsuma had access to the Chinese market. The Ryukyu kingdom found itself in an interesting state in which it was technically independent, but it was both a vassal to Ming China and a vassal to Japan through Satsuma. When Japan began a period of economic isolation, the Ryukyu kingdom became an important post for trade, as Japan only allowed trade through Dejima, Tsushima, and Okinawa. However, Japan would eventually be forced to open trade with the world by the United States in the 1850s, which led to the Boshin War. The Boshin War is a long story, but I've covered it over here in a stream I did as part of my History 101 series. The link to that video is in the description. Long story short, the Boshin War ended with the establishment of the Japanese Empire. Though the Ryukyu kingdom was still technically independent from the Japanese Empire, the newborn Japanese Empire was looking for the chance to make Okinawa a formal part of the empire, without having to risk war with China. 1871. A Ryukyu kingdom ship crashes onto the coast of what was then known as Formosa, now known as Taiwan, an island technically ruled by China now under the Qing dynasty. However, Formosa is largely free from Qing China as the native Paiwan aborigines are left to their own devices. The shipwrecked Okinawans wander deeper into Formosa until they are attacked by the Paiwan people. 54 of the Okinawans are massacred. 12 survivors are found by ethnically Han Chinese people, who rescue the Okinawans, returning them to the Ryukyu kingdom to tell their story. Japan hears of the massacre and is furious. In 1874, Japan launches an invasion of Formosa in retaliation for the massacre, which had become known as the Mudan Incident. The invasion of Formosa is the first overseas deployment of the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy. The invasion of Formosa, which was still technically Chinese territory, ended with a treaty between Japan and China, in which China inadvertently gave up its control over the Ryukyu kingdom, as Japan was recognized as Ryukyu's protector. Now the kingdom was a vassal to Japan, and Japan alone. The next year, the Ryukyu Kingdom was reorganized into the Ryukyu domain of the empire, though it isn't formally annexed just yet. In 1879, Japan announced its intentions to formally annex the Ryukyu Kingdom. China strongly protested this and reached out to Ulysses S. Grant, an American Civil War hero and a former president of the United States who was on tour in Asia at the time. Former President Grant agreed to set up negotiations between China and Japan. The closest the two nations came to a deal was with the proposal for Japan to annex the Amami Islands northward and for China to annex the Miyako Islands and Yaeyama Islands southward, with the central islands of Okinawa remaining an independent Ryukyu kingdom. However, these negotiations failed and Japan annexed the entire Ryukyu kingdom. The Ryukyu domain was reorganized into Okinawa Prefecture, a proper territory of the Japanese Empire. With the annexation of the Ryukyu kingdom, much changed on the island. King Shotai was brought to Tokyo, where he had his royal titles replaced with the title of Marquis as part of Japanese nobility. Today, the man who would be the king of Okinawa if Okinawa was still independent is a man named Sho Tsuguru. Sho worked at a Zen bar just down the road from the Imperial Palace in Tokyo as of 1999. In an effort to make Okinawa conform to Japanese culture, the empire began a systematic campaign to change Okinawan culture from the ground up. The language of education in the schools was the standard Tokyo dialect of Japanese. The Okinawan language was declared to be simply a dialect of Japanese, and students who spoke Okinawan in class were shamed by wearing the dialect tag for the remainder of the class. As the Okinawan language, culture, and religion were under attack, the Okinawans initially met the colonization of Okinawa with hostility. However, as Japan began to become the most prominent power in East Asia, this sentiment began to change. As Japan was victorious in war after war, defeating China in the First Sino-Japanese War, crushing Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, and emerging victorious in the global conflict known then as the Great War, now known as World War I, led to many Okinawans being proud citizens of the empire. When the Japanese Empire needed Japanese people to colonize various islands won after World War I, like Saipan, the Okinawans were even the most prominent group who would go out and colonize these regions for the empire. At the outbreak of World War II, many Okinawans wished to prove their worth to the empire and joined various branches of the Japanese military and fought in the war. However, as the years of conflict dragged on, it was becoming clear that Japan would not win the war, and the question as to what would happen to both Japan and Okinawa after defeat was a question coming to the minds of the Allied powers. In 1943, U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt and Chinese military dictator Chiang Kai-shek agreed to ruling Okinawa together after the war. In 1945, the front lines of the war came to Okinawa, when the United States invaded the island in the climactic Battle of Okinawa, one of the last major battles and one of the largest battles of World War II, in which the largest battleship of all time was sunk, 1/3 of the civilian population died, many committed suicide, including nearly the entire population of Zamami Island. 54% of the population of the Yaeyama Islands died from starvation and disease, and many Okinawans died as part of grassroots-formed militias to resist the invading Americans. Much of the history-filled landscape of Okinawa was destroyed, including the pricelessly important cultural site of the old Shiri Castle. As weird as it is for me to say, I think most of you probably remember the destruction of Shiri Castle from Call of Duty World at War.
Word is, main force pulled back to the North Ridge. But I want everyone ready to fight. As soon as that supply drop shows, we move. There it is! Move, get to it, double time! They're coming right out!
I love World at War, but man, I can't tell you how much I hated that level as an Okinawan. In addition to this, it is estimated that as many as 10,000 Okinawan women may have been raped by American forces during and after the Battle of Okinawa. It is believed that rape was so prevalent that most Okinawans over the age of 65 in around the year 2000 either knew or had heard of a woman who was raped in the aftermath of the war. There are so many details in the Battle of Okinawa that deserve to be highlighted. For the purposes of this video, I'm skipping over most of it, but know that I'm doing this with the intention of giving the Battle of Okinawa its own video in the future. Following the Battle of Okinawa and the defeat of Japan in World War II, the United States military directly ruled Okinawa as a military dictatorship until an American civil administration took control in 1950. A self-governing body was created in 1952 to work alongside the American civil administration. Similarly, Japan was also under American occupation following World War II and received independence in 1952. However, Okinawa was separated from Japan and became an American territory. The original plan of sharing Okinawa with China was thrown out the window as Chiang Kai-shek had lost the Chinese Civil War, and the government of China was a communist regime with which the United States had a generally hostile relationship. The United States ruled Okinawa rather than giving it back to Japan due to the strategic importance Okinawa served during the Cold War. Okinawa was a valuable spot for the American military to occupy to counter communist states in the region, particularly the Soviet Union, North Korea, the People's Republic of China, North Vietnam, and so on. On Okinawa, the United States dollar was the official currency, and cars drove on the right side of the road American style, as opposed to the Japanese style of driving on the left side. Besides this, the United States did little to invest in the development of Okinawa. Throughout the duration of American administration of Okinawa, the United States almost purely focused on its own military, instead of supporting Okinawa after the war. Most funds on Okinawa were spent to build larger military bases. Discontent began to grow between the Okinawan people and the American occupiers as the military bases occupied 19% of Okinawa's territory. U.S. military personnel were exempt from domestic jurisdiction in many cases, often resulting in the U.S. military personnel committing crimes and not being brought to justice due to the Okinawan authorities being unable to arrest them. In the 1960s, as the Vietnam War was raging, the United States began to experiment with an extremely toxic chemical known as Agent Orange to help level the playing field in Vietnam. Agent Orange was tested on Okinawa first, though the U.S. government denies this to this day. Local Okinawan people around certain areas began to develop cases of leukemia, one of the side effects of Agent Orange. In 2002, various mysterious drums were dug up on Okinawa that were confiscated by the government, with the drums' contents never being released to the public. 30 different U.S. veterans claim they saw Agent Orange on Okinawa, and various locations are suspected of having Agent Orange contamination, including Naha, Higashi, and Chatham. As you can imagine, due to the maltreatment of the Okinawan people, an Okinawan independence movement began to grow on Okinawa, hoping that the United States would one day give Okinawa independence. These hopes were dashed when the United States made a deal with Japan. Japan was allowed to buy Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands back from the United States at the price of 5 annual payments of $320 million. Japan bought Okinawa, and Okinawa returned to Japanese jurisdiction. Japan and the United States immediately signed a treaty that allowed the U.S. military bases to remain on Okinawa on the condition that they be kept free from nuclear weapons. The same laws regarding the jurisdiction of local law in regards to U.S. military personnel continue to be in effect, much to the outrage of the Okinawan people. On July 30th, 1978, an event known as 730 took place, when Okinawa switched its driving rules from driving on the right side of the road to driving on the left. When this change took place, there were many traffic accidents. Okinawa has had a rough yet unique history, hanging in the balance of autonomy and rule by China, Japan, and the United States. Today, there is a legacy of Okinawa's misrule in the fact that Okinawa is the poorest prefecture of Japan. Much of the island is occupied by U.S. military bases that serve as both an important part of the island's economy, but also a significant source of the crime on the island. 2 U.S. Marines and a sailor kidnapped and raped a 12-year-old Japanese girl in 1995. Due to the jurisdiction agreement between Japan and the United States, the case was mishandled and prolonged. In 2008, a U.S. Marine was arrested for raping a 14-year-old Japanese girl, and a member of the U.S. Army was arrested for the suspected raping of a Filipino woman on Okinawa. Much of the Okinawan population wants the United States forces off the island, or at least decreased in size, though much of mainland Japan views the U.S. military bases as being important for defending Japan from China and other nearby countries. Instead of downsizing, U.S. military bases are expanding and destroying local coral reefs, despite an Okinawan referendum opposing the expansion. Okinawa is one of the very few places where there is a strong support for socialist and communist parties that lean further to the left than most of Japan's political parties. Both the Okinawan left and the Okinawan far right want the removal of the United States military bases and more autonomy for Okinawa. In addition, the Okinawan far right supports the creation of an independent Okinawa, while some on the far left support an independent Okinawa with support from the People's Republic of China. Meanwhile, the Okinawan language has reached a critical endangered point, as very few people on the island speak the language today. Japanese is very much the lingua franca and primary language of Okinawa, with English coming in second. While Okinawa has had a long history of being independent with their own culture, many Okinawans under the age of 60 identify simply as being Japanese, just like any other part of Japan. And many Okinawans in their 20s often pack up and leave Okinawa to mainland Japan to find work due to a lack of jobs on Okinawa. In addition to all this, China has claims to various islands in the Ryukyu Islands, and is suspected to have further ambitions to bring Okinawa back into the fold one day. Though it is a beautiful island paradise, Okinawa's future is in a very precarious situation. And that's going to wrap up today's episode of Primus Academy. This video has been the most ambitious Primus Academy video yet, so I hope you've enjoyed. Like I said, I will be moving to Okinawa soon, and I intend to make videos on Okinawa history at various historical locations. So if you like this video, please subscribe, and you'll be seeing more of this in the coming months. I also make other forms of content on this channel, so feel free to click around and see if there's any other nerdy thing you like on here. My social media links are all in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, ladies and gentlemen.